Father's Day in Appalachia is special dinners with Daddy's favorite cake or pie for dessert. It's fathers, young, middle-aged, and old, standing around feeling backwards and slightly uncomfortable from all the extra attention they're receiving on that day. Father's Day in Appalachia is simple gifts. It's about simple gifts. Maybe just a hug or I love you, maybe a book, a new book, a shirt, or maybe something as simple as getting rocks from the creek and painting a pretty design on them. I was definitely a daddy's girl growing up. My brothers and I were so lucky. We were just given the best parents that you could ever ask for. And I was just crazy about Pap from the time I was a little girl till, of course, all through the rest of my life. He was my go-to person when I needed advice about anything. He's the one I would call. When I was a young adult especially, I probably drove him crazy calling him. I would call him 2 or 3 times a day sometimes to ask his opinion about something or ask him how to do something or what he thought about this or what he thought about that. He was my sounding board. He was the person that I always wanted to get his opinion about whatever was going on in my life, and I'm so thankful that I had him. But as we think about fathers, of course we think, and I hope that you had a good father too, or maybe if you didn't have a good biological father, maybe you had a father figure in your life, someone else that played that role. But as we think about fathers, we often think about the wisdom, things that they told us, and of course the responsibleness of being a person. They helped create who we are as human beings, helped us be the adults that we are today as we grew up. But over the years I've wrote about Father's Day and Father's advice often on the Blind Pig and the Acorn, as you might imagine, since Father's Day comes up every year. So I've jotted down some advice, some just not really life advice, but just some, when you think about the things that stick out in your mind, some advice that Pap told me. And I think the first time that I wrote it, shared these on the Blind Pig and the Acorn, I probably got Paul to help me come up with them because one of them's about him. But one of Pap's things was he would always tell us never go home with a half a tank of gas. At least you got to have at least a half a tank of gas, because you never know what might happen way up in the middle of the night, and then you'll wish that you had a full tank of gas or enough gas to get to where you could get a full tank of gas. So a lot of times when my car's on empty, I hear Pap's voice in my head telling me not to go home before I put gas in my car. Use your best first. Pap would tell us this: use your best first. That way as you move forward, you'll always be using your best. You hear a lot of people say they want to save their best for last, but Pap looked at it differently. He said, no, use your best first, and as you go forward, you'll always be using your best. And that's just how he looked at it, and that's how he would tell us that, my brothers and I. This one's just a funny one, but an odd one. If you hurt yourself, maybe you run into the door, or you stubbed your toe or something, he would say to rub it as hard as you could, just as hard as you could, and that would make the pain go away. Well, I remember one time, Paul, he was probably about 10 years old or something, and the mayonnaise fell out. In those days, it was glass jar, mayonnaise fell out of the refrigerator and hit him on his toe, and he was barefooted, and he just started hopping around because it was hurting him so bad. But Pap put his foot down on top of Paul's, and at first Paul resisted, but then he let him, and he just kind of kept rubbing it real hard with his foot, and the pain went away. Now, whether that's positive reinforcement from Pap or some scientific thing, I don't know, but when I hit myself, the first thing I do is start rubbing it as hard as I can. And maybe it just takes your mind off of the actual pain that you were feeling, but that's just one of the things. When you think of the unusual or interesting things that your dad taught you, that was one that Daddy taught us. This other one is kind of funny, become kind of a joke in our family, was how early Pap would leave to get to an appointment. He believed in giving himself plenty of time to get there, and it's kind of become like a running joke in our family. Well, if Pap had to be there at 8 and it was a 2-hour trip, he might leave at midnight. That's an exaggeration. He wouldn't do that. But we'd all tease about how early he'd leave. But over the years, that him instilling in me to leave and give myself plenty of extra time, especially if you're going to a place that you've never been before, has paid off so many times. It's just always better to be early, is the way he looked at it, and a lot of the times it did. It paid off, whether there was maybe a car wreck or a traffic jam or your car tear up or something. So that was another one that he taught all of us, and I think we all abide by it. I think me and Paul and Steve all would do that. We'd leave early enough to get there, make sure that we had enough time, but then we also teased Pap about it, and it's kind of like a running joke between us. along with those thoughts of wisdom. Of course, there's lots of other wisdom Pap imparted to us on a daily basis. That's what, of course, good fathers do. It's the way they live their lives and the way that you witness what they do, how they live in front of you. That imparts the best wisdom. But there was just some things one year when I was trying to think about Father's Day, and I just started thinking about Pap, and just thought about the first things that popped into my mind when I thought about him, and thought about him as as being a father. And it's kind of unusual or odd things, but like for one, I never, not one time in my entire life, seen Pap in a pair of tennis shoes. He never owned them. He only wore boots. He had like these sort of dress kind of boots that he would wear to church, but then mostly every day he wore lace-up boots, like what you might think of as logger boots or whatever, but that's what he wore. Never one time did I ever see him in a pair of tennis shoes or any kind of sandals or anything like that, only those boots. Pap was a coffee drinker, so he drank coffee with every meal. He didn't just drink it in the morning, he drank it. He was one of those people that drank coffee throughout the day. So if you went out to eat with Pap and to supper somewhere, he was going to order coffee. If I was taking him to the doctor at the VA and on the way back we stopped somewhere for dinner, he was going to order coffee. He always drank coffee. And if you were with him and you drank a glass of sweet tea or something, he might borrow a piece of ice out of your glass to cool his coffee down so that he could drink it. But he was a big coffee drinker. The only time that I ever seen Pap cry, I seen him have emotion, of course, whether it was maybe we were watching a movie or something had happened to a friend or something like that. But the only time I ever saw him cry big, racking sobs, just really, really sobbing, it was the first time I'd ever seen it, the only time I ever seen it actually, even as time went on. So it really sticks out in my mind. But it was at his mother's funeral. That was the only time when my mama died that I ever seen Pap cry like that. And I remember two of his cousins literally had to lead him out of the church. They were on both sides of him. And I was sad too. I loved my mama, but mostly I was just I just can see me, little me. I was in about 5th grade just staring, just shocked that Pap was so upset, which now I see, of course, why wouldn't he have been upset? It was his mother, so that was the only time. But for all Pap's sweetness, he did have a mischievous streak. I think that's a common thing in the Wilson family. So one of his mischievous streaks that I remember was one time, I don't remember where we were going. Of course, in those days, that we had those big cars. It's more like boats than today. Pap had a big Impala. That's the one I learned to drive in. We had a big Ford LTD. We had various cars, but we were in one of those. And in those days, seatbelt laws weren't a thing. And of course, there was no air conditioning, so all the windows were down. And my older brother, Steve, he was wherever we were going, he was leaning out the window with both arms, probably because he was hot. I don't know how kids do. And Pap warned him that he needed to get his arms inside the car. He needed to quit doing that. Well, Steve didn't listen to him, and he kept doing it. So we come along this place where there were some briars alongside the road, and of course Pap wasn't going real fast, but he swarped the car over into those briars, so Steve's arms went through the briars to teach him to quit sticking his hands out the windows. Well, that may sound mean to you, but it really wasn't mean. It was just a lesson. But see, that makes me smile, so maybe I have a little mischievous streak too. Anyway, that was a funny one. When I was growing up, there was a pond down the road that my uncle built. It's not there now, but that's where I learned how to swim. It's where a lot of us here in the holler learned how to swim. And oh my goodness, I was crazy about going to swim in that pond. But Granny was really strict. Even when we learned how to swim, she didn't want us to go there without supervision, without an adult supervision. She wanted somebody to watch us, even though we knew how to swim. So I would beg and plead for somebody to come, beg and plead. And she couldn't swim, so it could never be Granny because she couldn't swim. But so mostly it was Pap. That's who it was, unless one of the uncles or somebody else in the family agreed to watch us play in the pond. And one day I was just begging and begging and begging and begging. That's how Granny would say it, but begging Pap to go down there and let me swim. Well, he just got off work, and he was having to get ready to go somewhere that night and make music. I don't know if it was like a church service revival or what it was, but I just kept on and on and on and wouldn't hush until finally Pap said, all right, let's go. And he took me down there and let me swim, and he took his bath. He took bar soap, and he took his bath because he just got off work and then he needed to get ready to go to church, and he took his bath in the pond so that I could swim. So that's just one of my favorite memories now that I'm an adult. So over the years, as I've wrote about Father's Day on the Blind Pig and the Acorn, I've also asked my readers, well, would you share some of your wisdom from your father, or maybe just some of the unusual things, like me, like that Pap, I never seen Pap in a pair of tennis shoes, something like that. So I was going to read you a few of them. So Pinnacle Creek said, Father's Day has become a day of reflection. It's so easy to let my mind wander back to those days when I still had my dad, and he taught me lessons each and every day we shared. I sure enjoyed doing his grocery shopping and helping him harvest the garden. He never quit planting. He called me youngin' most of the time. Could he have really been as perfect as I remember him? I picked beans one year until I was exhausted and covered with chigger bites and a few yellow jacket stings too. He decided to give the last bucketful to a needy cousin. I complained that I didn't really pick those for somebody else. In the calmest, most gentle voice one could ever hear, my dad said, "You are getting greedy, young'un." It made me stop to think how fortunate we were and taught me great humility. Ever since that time, I feel blessed, and I became very given of my time and labor. Yes, he taught me well. Ed Ammons, Papaw, he says, I remember carrying water in a quart mason jar to my father out in the fields. I started out with the jar full, but no matter how hard I tried, I never made it to him without sloshing out at least a little. He would turn it up, drink the whole jar without taking it down, and hand it back to me. I would go for a refill. He would take that quart and pour it over his head and neck. Melanie said, here are 3 random facts about my dad. He's a musician. He's steady. He quit a 30-year pack-a-day smoking habit just because my boy asked him to. Janera, 3 things. He had opinions and didn't mind sharing them. He would do anything to help another human being. He loved his wife, his kids, and his grandkids deeply. Oh, just one more, please. We miss him. That's a fact. Jim Cassida said, as you know, my siblings and I were more blessed than most in that Daddy enjoyed an exceptionally long life, 101 well-lived years, with his mind being sound and incisive right to the end. All of us children were blessed, although we probably didn't appreciate it sufficiently at the time, by taking turns living with him and looking after him in his final years. There's never a day that passes that I don't think of something he said or did, or of some question I wished I'd ask him. His entire life was lived in Clay County, first 5 years, Haywood County, a year or so working, and Swain County, well over 90 years. He was truly a son of the Smokies in every way, practical, gifted in terms of being able to figure out or engineer what was needed to suit most any task, incredibly hard-working, and caring in his own quiet, reserved way. I miss him terribly. Carolyn said, our dad has passed on, but he left us with values that we use every day of our lives. Work hard, be good and kind, and help others when you can. He didn't make much, raised 7 children on his salary, and was loved and respected by many. He made us laugh too, which was better than gold. Our granddad also passed this on to me. Work hard, dance when you can, and give thanks to the Lord above for all that you have. 2 great men who taught me how to be as independent as I am. Martina says, my dad was very good at seeing a problem and fixing it with what was at hand. One was a door closer that involved eye bolts, twine, a plastic cigar tube, and lead shot. Dad liked to draw and paint seascapes and building stuff in his workshop. However, what I remember most about him were his laugh and the way he could hug powerful hugs. That and singing on top of Old Smoky when we went on car vacations. He is still loved and missed daily by his family, 24 years after he went home. His word of wisdom to me when I got my own apartment, if it doesn't smell good, don't eat it. I hope you enjoyed hearing those stories and little tidbits about Pap and about the other fathers, the ones I shared from the Blind Pig and the Acorn. So many things. I could talk about Pap all day long, but so many things I'm thankful for him as a father. some of the ones I shared, of course, but I mean, I think about the gift of music that he gave to our family, because he had this musical ability, and he fostered it his entire life, and therefore he passed it on to his children and to his grandchildren. You know, just our music, it wouldn't be here without him. I'm thankful for that. You know, my girls, if y'all have never heard my girls, go listen to them, and Paul and I play with them. I'll leave those links. I always leave them in the description. You can go check those out. Check out our music channels. But that wonderful gift of music, you know, that come from Pap. He's the one that instilled that in us. His faith, as a Christian, he passed his faith on to us, the importance of having a faith. He did that. He taught us about that. And as far as for me, when I talk about Appalachia, whether it's on this channel or on the Blind Pig and the Acorn, he's really the reason for that. While we were growing up, he just instilled in us this feeling of being not proud as in the way that we've got something somebody else does, but proud in the way an Appalachian would say it, happy. That we were happy to be where we were at, that we were happy to have the culture that we had, we were happy to talk the way that we did. He always just made me feel that that was something to be celebrated, something that was positive in our lives, you know, and that the rest of the world, that we should never be ashamed. So when we went out into the world to make our way, that we never need to be ashamed of where we come from or who we are, because that was something he took a pride in, and therefore that bled over into us taking a pride in it, and always being happy, you know, to know who we were, and that was okay. We were just who we were, and we were happy to be who we were. So really, he's that feeling that he instilled in us to like the old ways and the old-timey things. That's really the reason behind the Blind Pig and the Acorn and this channel. You know, I could lay it all at Pap's feet, really. He instilled, he pricked my curiosity about those things, and it's because of him that I kept wanting to know more and to research, and then eventually to, you know, I've got a video where I talk about how the Blind Pig and the Acorn come about, but eventually how that I could do it on a larger scale, so that I could share that, celebrating our culture with others. So really, he's the reason behind all that, and I'm really thankful for that, because without him, then I would have no reason to do this. You know, I wouldn't have met all you wonderful people that I've been able to meet, all you wonderful people that I appreciate so much. I hope that you'll leave a comment and tell me some things about the father figures in your family, maybe the wisdom, or maybe some of the odd little things that they did or didn't do. Share that in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. I read all the comments, and I really enjoy them. I really appreciate them. It's like Pap would say, each one you leave is like a little jewel. So I've just got a little jewel to take and to study on and to think about, and I really appreciate that. As always, I hope you'll continue to drop back by and help me celebrate Appalachia.